It's 11:24, 24 minutes past 11. We were talking about tips. Some of you have already been in touch, actually. Leaving a tip in a restaurant. It's always been a bit controversial, but now we're asking if you actually know where the money you tip goes. Does it go into the pocket of the member of serving staff, or does it go to the company that they work for? Maybe you work in the industry, you have experience of this. Maybe the tips have been taken by management. Maybe management says, no, you did the work, you take it. Let us know your experiences. Keep your calls and texts coming in the usual way. We're talking about this because there's a new bill which is looking to protect the money given to staff for their service, making sure that they receive what's left by customers. And the MP for Watford, Dean Russell, has proposed this bill and joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on the show.
Pleasure. How much do you tip on average when you go to a restaurant, if you believe the service is worth tipping?
Gosh, it's hard to say. Normally sort of rule of 10 to 15%, isn't it? I sort of normally work to. But if you have particularly good service, I always like to give more if I can.
Okay, fine. So that's where you stand on tipping. Why have you been well behind this bill, proposing this bill, being behind this?
Well, the thing for me is it's about fairness. And my take is I have a lot of hospitality businesses in Watford, but also know many across the country. I'm a small business ambassador. And one of the bits for me is that you hear regularly about the challenges for hospitality, but also for people who work in hospitality. And for me, it's about fairness. If somebody gives a tip to somebody, it's for them. And when I found out a few years ago, actually, that some businesses take some of that money or a percentage of it or all of it, that doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't seem right. And it shouldn't really require a law to make it so that businesses don't keep tips. But what I'm very conscious of is that we seem to be moving much more towards a cashless society, which I don't think is necessarily a good thing in of itself. But also what that means is more people are tipping via credit card. And so actually, if you knew that when you're tipping via credit card, that the person you're giving it to gets that money, I think you'd feel far more confident. But also for the worker and the member of staff, whether it's in a hairdresser's or in a restaurant, should know that that money's going to get to them. And for me, it's about fairness.
Who do you think should get the tip? Just the person who served you?
Either the person who served you, or if there's an agreement within the staff and within the company of how it's split up. So in some cases, some people perhaps tip more, others might tip less. But actually, as a pool, if there's an agreement to say, well, everyone's going to get an equal share, that's fair enough as well. But I think it needs to be an agreement on the approach for that. And that's what this bill is trying to do. It's trying to say, look, if a tip is given from an employment rights perspective, you get that tip, or if there's an agreement in place with your colleagues that it's shared in some way, then that's there as well. But it absolutely is saying that businesses shouldn't be taking money from people tipping.
That could be difficult if, say, the kitchen staff don't get on with the waiting staff.
Well, that's the point, though. If you're in agreement with your colleagues on how you split it up, then that's fair enough. But it's about just bringing some clarity to the point. And like I say, it's about fairness. So from a tips perspective, most of us, when we give that tip, I think, are assuming that the person or the staff are going to get it. And that could be the chef in the kitchen. It could be people behind the bar. But at the moment, there's nothing to protect them to make sure that they do get that. A business could, and many don't. Many businesses do the right thing, but businesses could take a share of that or take all of it and assume that's a payment to the business. That to me doesn't seem fair. And so putting this bill in place makes sure that you can do that. You can make sure that staff are being looked after.
So when the service charge goes on the bill, if, say, at the moment the business is taking it, could there be a possibility that you could get the service charge from the business on the till, and then you'd have to add a tip if you wanted the other staff to receive it?
So I think the main thing is that if you're giving a tip, so if there's a service charge, then that would be, in my view, a tip. So the point here is that there's got to be an agreement in place on how that then is given out to the staff. So it's not about trying to make anyone the bad guy in this. It's not about trying to be harsh on businesses. But I think from an employee perspective, if you've given good service all night and your colleagues have within a restaurant or hairdressers or whatever, and there's tips given, the assumption, I think, for most people would be that tip is going to that staff, to those members of staff. The idea that actually the business might keep that now is not right. But in the past, I think when people gave much more tips in terms of cash, it was a very different thing. You could almost see where it was going. But increasingly, people are paying invisibly, as it were, via credit cards and via other means. And so that means you actually don't see the transfer of that money. You don't, and even the member of staff doesn't necessarily see it. So this is just about fairness, and it's just really a tweak to make sure that tips go to where people want them to go, which is the member of staff or the staff behind the scenes, like you're quite rightly saying.
Dean Russell, MP for Watford, thank you very much for your time with me today. It is 11:35. Nick has the news for us. Hi, Nick.